welcome to One on One. I'm Vernon and I'm pleased to say my guest today is no stranger to the program, Hanif Benjamin of the Center for Human Development, trauma specialist. Welcome back, Hanif.
Thank you for having me.
Always a pleasure having you on. I think you were, as we were saying before, you're gunning for like most regular guests on the program these days.
Yeah. I'm hoping to get that.
Well, we're living in a society that's obviously affected by trauma. It's an area that you work in, so it's not really surprising in that sense. You've got a series of workshops coming up, and we want to talk about them. But I mentioned before, as you were coming in, that given this sort of verging on hysteria that we're seeing around the world about the Ebola virus, and here at home, of course, we're no exception. To some extent, that can be a form of trauma on a wide scale, can't it?
Of course. What I call it is vicarious trauma, Vernon. And vicarious trauma is really, living the pain and hurt of someone else. And that is now coupled with anxiety and fear. So you have a situation where we are seeing the trend or pattern in the world, and no longer are we different or no longer are we segregated, and it's right on our doorsteps, and that in itself is creating panic. And I'm not sure whether or not enough is being done, not only to mitigate the fears, but to help people to really understand the psychological impact that this is going to have on people. And I'm hearing conversation, I've been part of conversation where people are really, really, really worried. If this thing should reach here, to some degree, they can't even call it by name, because, again, the fear factor. If this should reach here, what is going to happen, And so it's now creating a sort of serious level of anxiety among the society, fear, worry, panic. And this is remedy for chaos if it's not managed properly. So in addition to all the medical stuff that we're hearing, the ads in the papers, which is extremely good, we must also look at the psychological impact of this impending doom. Because then it's being linked to spirituality and revelation, and all of this is the conversations that you hear going out here. What is being done, even in the churches, what is being done to help with the psychological and or the spiritual impact of this of the Ebola virus onto the society, and we need to start to have honest conversations about it.
And to some extent, governments need to be very careful in how they handle the situation, don't they?
Correct.
Because the first reaction was here and in other countries, listen, it's heading our way, we've got to batten down the hatches, we've got to be very careful, we've got to send people back where they came from, etc., etc. And then only afterwards, certainly in the case of the US, you saw President Obama saying, listen, let's settle down here. This is not a widespread anything. We've had a couple of cases. It's really not a big deal at this point. We're just trying to mitigate any potential.
It tends to link to leadership, and whether or not as a leader you're able to exacerbate fears or you're able to quell. That is going to be the crux of the matter. I was having a conversation on one of the workshops, which is crisis management. How are we able to mitigate crises? Two things can happen. Through our response, we could either exacerbate a crisis or we could mitigate it. And that comes with the level of response, what is said and not said, what is done or not done. You see, so here it is, you can have actions, for example, locking down the country. While that seems plausible, we need to understand the psychological impact of that. That is creating panic, right? Because now you're locking down the country from people from that part of the world, but what about people who may have traversed throughout and make the full circle to come back? So we have to be careful what we say and how we say it. We give the impression that we are airtight. We give the impression that we are sealed solid, that we are ready, we got to go. But yet the major countries in the world saying, hey, we're not even ready if this thing really were to get out of hand. So again, leadership need to understand the psychology behind fear and panic, and understand that if we continue the way we are continuing and dealing with it, we are going to create chaos in a situation that may not necessarily need to be chaotic.
So it's a two-edged thing then, because governments should not be creating panic or knowing that if they do certain actions that may create panic. And also, they need to also not be creating a false sense of security either.
Correct. Now that is important what you said, a false sense of security. You see, because for many years, we always hear, even with the ODPM, and we're ready. We always seem ready for something. And I keep asking myself, if we have never tested it, how we know we're ready? If we have never been part of it, how we know we're ready? So again, we need to be careful when we use this thing that we are ready, because it gives the sense that, okay, if we're ready, I good to go, I cool. It means then that our response will be limited because we're ready. You see? So I just want people to understand the importance of the psychology behind crises, and crisis of this magnitude, because it's no longer a domestic crisis. It is an international crisis. And we have to understand firstly what we're dealing with, and understand its levels, and understand its intensities throughout the world. So here it is, we have the leader of the first world saying, hey, calm down, calm down. That is, he's saying, we seem to have been really running. Let's just slow it down and have a proper assessment as to where we are and what we're about. And that is what we need here.
That's
we
what
need
you
a
as a
sense of
psychologist,
calm.
as a psychologist, you do it as well, don't you? You bring perspective to a situation. Here's what you think what you're going through. Let's pull back and have some perspective.
Of course.
So you have a sense.
Because, and that is classic crisis management. Calm down, let us assess, and let us come up with proper assessments. You see, because we make decisions based on fear. And it's the same thing that I say to my clients. We cannot make life decisions based on emotion that may have been dysregulated because of something. So we can't keep just reacting emotionally. We have to now take it easy, bring reality to the situation, and then make proper decisions. Because then the decisions we'll be making will not be based on the facts or based on reality. Rather, it will be based out of fear. And decision made out of fear is no decision at all, because then we would not have dealt with the initial issue that we wanted to deal with. So the psychological impact has to be also line on line with the medical impact. Just like we've seen all the advertisements on the papers, on the radio, on the flashboards, billboards about the medical aspect, so must we also see the psychological impact. Calming a nation, calming a society, letting people know we can learn the facts, we can learn what's going on, we can understand the international trends, and then we can make decisions based on that.
I mean, it seems that, any of us who've lived past a certain age have seen these things happen over and over again. The world suddenly panics, whether it's swine flu or SARS or everything, and everybody's in a mad panic. And then after a while, people realize, wait a minute, okay, it's not what we thought it was. And then everything sort of settled down to a more realistic approach. Given the fact that now we've got Senegal and Nigeria now declared by the WHO Ebola free, it shows that even developing world countries can manage this.
Of course.
Does that mean that the rest of the world will gradually go, okay, maybe we should calm down, because if Nigeria can handle it and Senegal can handle it, we can handle it too?
Well, that is one way to look at it, Vernon. But the next way that we must also look at it is like, listen, I don't want to give the false sense that we should calm into a slumber. If you understand what I mean. We need to be vigilant, but we need to be educated in our vigilance. If you understand what I mean. We need to take action, but we need to take the right action. You see? So it's not a matter of, all right, well, everybody good, we could relax and put up your foot and drink coffee. Now that,
Well, I don't make an excellent cup of coffee.
Well, yes, definitely. Actually, it tastes really well, actually.
Well, there you go. Yeah, skills.
But the fact is, we need to relax while we are learning and developing.
Which is the example that we see in Senegal, which never really had an outbreak. It had one case, but certainly in Nigeria, where they said, okay, we're going to contain this calmly and rationally. In fact, the WHO said it was a world-class approach they took. But now both countries are saying, listen, we've contained it. It's no longer present in our country, but we're still being vigilant.
Correct. And that is the approach everyone should take.
We're not laying back, right?
Right. So you have taken action, but you are taking action in a rational sense and not irrational. Because our approach, while I'm not saying it is irrational, it is panicked. It is panicked. And we need not be taking panicked approach. We need to stop, examine, and make proper decision based on the examination, not a panic approach.
And that's where leadership comes in, isn't it? Because quite often politicians will think they have to be seen to do something because the public is clamoring for it, whether it makes sense or not. And they go ahead and do it. And that just feeds it back into the panic again, doesn't it?
Right, and the crisis.
Yeah.
So it means then that we did not alleviate the crisis. We actually fueled the crisis. So while I understand the politician need to speak, and need to appear as if they're doing something, there's also the room that they must understand that the psychological impact. They must understand that impact. And they must take the two in focus, the medical as well as the psychological. Because without the two, we will still have chaos. Right? Because you could have all the medical, if you're in panic mode and crisis, people are going to go into trauma, people are going to go into anxiety, people are going to literally start locking themselves away. Right? Our hospitals are going to become scarce with nurses and doctors because everybody's going to run if a person comes in with a rash. We're going to look at every person who cough, or we're going to look at every person who seems to be ill as having some form of Ebola. And we have seen it through the ages with swine flu and all of these things, where from the time you cough, they send you home. You see? And that is because we are not understanding the psychological impact. We are operating out of fear and panic. And we need to stop and take a critical examination of the reality and come up with world-class reality options like we have seen in Senegal and these other places.
Well, I want to push you to the very edge of your area of expertise, because it's sort of treading the limit here. I don't necessarily subscribe to this theory. In fact, I don't. But a lot of people on Facebook tend to subscribe to, and Twitter, semi-conspiracy theories. They believe that governments thrive, and I guess maybe it works through history. Governments thrive on fear, and therefore having the public in a fearful state and a panic state makes them more easy to manipulate. From a psychological perspective.
Well, you're talking about clear narcissism there now. That is a narcissistic trait. You understand? And we would have seen some leaders in the past, created that level of hysteria. And in hysteria, you come in and you see him as a savior. But that is classic access to diagnosis, which is our personality realm. Where we're dealing with a level of narcissistic personality disorder, the need to lead, the need to always feel as if you're in control, the need to control people through fear or hysteria or anxiety, so that then you can shape a response, right? Because what is fear? Fear is the absence of being in control. And if you're not in control, that means somebody else needs to be. So then if the somebody else is me, then I would control where you go, how you respond. That is what fear is.
So if you traumatize someone, you have a little more control over them.
Of course. I mean, I could even link this to the whole domestic violence situation. I tell people the worst part of domestic violence is not the physical lash. It's not the black eye, but it's the fear that is instilled in someone. That is what makes them stay. Everybody keep asking why it is you stay. The reason why you stay is because of the fear. I can control you through the fear.
And also right? your loss of self-worth as well.
Of course.
Yeah.
So all of that.
I'm not good enough, therefore I deserve this. Yeah.
So and as a result of that, you stay. Or if you go, you come back because you realize that, wait, I am no longer good. So yes, you are correct in terms of hysteria and fear. But I pray to God that is not the ploy being used here, because this Ebola situation and other situations are critical and has the propensity to be quite deadly. And so I pray to God that we are using sense, we're using reality to come to proper decision making as it relates to the situation in the country.
Well, all of these subjects, and I guess others, will also be addressed. I'm sure you've tied them into your workshops, right?
Definitely.
Which are coming up towards November.
Mid-November.
Mid-November, the 18th to the 20th, I think it is.
Yes. So the first one, Vernon, is the trauma workshop, which is understanding trauma for children and adolescents to the continuum of care. You would have remembered I was here advertising the Trauma 1. So this Trauma 2 workshop now, really, really exciting stuff, because we are actually going into the trauma system therapy or theory. We have cognitive behavioral therapy, you have Gestalt. We are now going into the trauma system theory, which is really helping people on a more integral, more intimate level to deal with trauma or traumatized clients. So we're asking all the people who would have been part of Trauma 1 to come on down, register for this. It will give you further skill set to manage trauma on a larger scale. We're asking if you have never taken the 1, we're going to have a period of review So you can come on down and still be a part of it. So that's the first one.
This is for professionals and people in the field.
Correct.
Could the average Joe benefit from this in any way?
Listen, the way we structure our workshop, anybody could come because everybody leaves with the same knowledge. The way we structure it, because it's interactive, it's informative, it's fun. We break it down. So from the man on the street to the doctor leaves with the same level, the same understanding. The reason why we even put the component of the review, so that if you were not in part one, you wouldn't be lost. There is no losing here, right? You will be part of it and you will leave with the same result.
So even if you're not somebody who will be dealing with other people with trauma, you can perhaps also analyze your own trauma if you've had some.
But that is a major part of the training, Vernon.
That's the Center for Human Development.
Correct, because the premise here is that you can't heal a broken heart if your heart is broken. You cannot mend a wound if you are indeed wounded. You understand? So in part of dealing with this, we are also dealing with your trauma. We're also helping you to understand that you need to be whole to help someone else. And that's a problem we have, you know. We have a lot of people who have a lot of deep, dark pain that they have not dealt with within their childhood in growing up. And now it is manifesting itself through their work. So you have a lot of transference and counter-transference, which is you are now portraying yourself onto your clients and the clients portraying them onto you. And because you have not dealt with it, you don't know how to manage it. You see, we call it the rape counselor syndrome. Everybody on the ground crying. Because you was raped, your client was raped, now everybody on the ground. So who is helping whom? So these workshops really not only give you the tools to go out there and help your clients, but it helps you. It gives you a greater perspective as to who you are, where you are in the continuum of care, and how might you help yourself so that you can help others.
Now this is being held in St. Augustine, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. This is Sir George Allen building, 25A Warner Street. All the workshops will be held there, and they all start from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. This workshop, which is the trauma, will be held on the 18th to the 20th of November, 2014. So the 18th to the 20th. Now, time is very limited and the seats are moving, because the workshops are always oversubscribed. And the thing is, Vernon, we don't train more than 30 to 40 people because of the level of interaction. Because everybody must speak. Everybody must take part. We have group sessions, we have group work, we have real cases that they will dissect and they will practice and we will guide them through that process. So we don't want it too big because then we don't want to lose the essence. If it's too big, you can't talk and express the way you want to, and I would not allow that.
And that's the very essence of the whole program.
Of course. Because I tell you, I am not the arbiter of all knowledge. The thing is that if all the professionals in the room can speak over the 3 days, then I could learn it from a medical perspective. The medical could understand it from a psychological, the psychological from a teacher to a guidance. And we share interactively. And that increased knowledge base exponentially, right? Because it's no longer just about all psychologists or all social workers, but you are having an opportunity to intermingle with many different professions. And that in itself really, really lends to the learning. I think that is a caveat of the learning, having all the different professions, you know? So that is our trauma workshop.
And on the 27th of November, you've got crisis management.
Right. No, and we were just talking about crisis. Vernon, because we recognize that crisis is an integral part of our society.
Now, crises can be large, as with Ebola, or they can be on a very small scale as well, but they all, I guess, have a commonality in how you approach them.
All crises managed badly will create more crisis. That's our approach. So whether it's the large crisis, Vernon, or the small crises, we need to learn to manage it. So this workshop, which is crisis avoidance, management and training for youth and adolescents. You hear this, crisis avoidance. A lot of people in Trinidad have crisis management. And that's it, full stop. But we are going to manage a crisis, teach you to manage a crisis and avoid it. Why is it that the police has to respond to this house every Monday? We manage a crisis when it happens, but yet we have to keep going back to the scene because we're not avoiding it.
But isn't there a sort of a personality that almost needs to go from, I'm not saying it's a good behavior, but some people seem to need to go from crisis to crisis to crisis.
That's how they live. That's because of their level of anxiety.
So everything's about hysteria.
Correct. And that has, anybody like that, they need to come and see me for one-on-one. because that in itself is a personality disorder. This level of compulsion, this always need to always be revving or going. That's a serious situation. So you find those people are what we would call the commerce makers. They're always trying to get something going because they need to be always moving. But more importantly, in understanding crisis management and avoidance is really about helping people to understand that we can manage a crisis when it's happening, but what can we do differently to ensure that it doesn't happen again? And you see that in school every day. Every Monday morning you have to respond to a certain student continually, over and over because of the same behavior. You manage a crisis when it's happening, yet next week it's going to happen again. So we are going to teach teachers, guidance officers, social workers, because it's the same situation in the courts, right? Parents, psychologists, all of these people, nurses, doctors, anyone who works with children and adolescents in crisis situation, the residential facilities. I want to, push this to the Ministry of Social Development, the Ministry of Gender, all the people who go out in our communities, even the people who respond to floods, yes, and fires, and all these crises. How can we avoid it from happening again? So this workshop is not just about understanding crisis. You're going to understand crisis. You're going to understand what makes and forms a crisis. We're going to understand how we participate in crises as leaders are. Because when you talk to a teacher, they would not for a minute think that they are lending to a crisis situation. But after this training, they will understand how inadvertently, by their very approach to the situation, might be elevating crises. And I'm not saying it's their fault, because they haven't been trained.
They don't know any better. Yeah.
Correct.
And I guess, really and truly, a crisis avoided is time that comes back to you, less stress, less everything.
Vernon, when we did some of this crisis avoidance, there was zero obstruction in class teaching, I want to tell Minister Gopi Singh, Dr. Gopi Singh this. If we come in and do this for all our guidance, our teachers, all our school social workers, you will see that the reduction in waste class time in dealing with crises. Because not only are we going to manage it, but we're going to avoid it. And if, as you rightly say, if you avoid 4 crises in your class, it means then that the 4 hours you would have spent managing the crisis, now you're avoiding it, so now you have 4 extra hours to teach. Now the teacher will be less anxious. The teacher's mental state will be different. So therefore, the approach to teaching will be different. The guidance counselor approach will be different. Because now they are more relaxed. They are no longer heightened.
And people aren't spending time recovering after a crisis, which psychologically takes time.
Not only that, no, you're talking about the reports has to be written. They have to go before this one. They have to go before that one. They have to, you understand what I'm saying? The parents have to come in. They have to take time off from school to go with the parent meeting. All of these things will be eliminated once you can understand a crisis, manage it, and avoid it.
Well, we're almost completely out of time, Hanif, so we have to just say there's a third
right,
workshop.
The third one.
In December.
This one is really exciting. The 2nd to the 4th of December, same place, same time. This is assessment and diagnosis. This is the understanding the fundamentals of psychological assessment and diagnosis. Vernon, we're in crisis. Because I say to people, if we are not able to understand diagnosis, like, for example, ADHD, ADD, we wouldn't understand what the children are going through. If we are not able to make proper assessment, then our reports will be flawed. And therefore, we're going to be making decisions for our children based on flawed assessment, because we did not understand the psychological reports when they came in. We don't know how to implement it. So even our treatment plans for our children and adolescents will be flawed. This training is geared to helping you understand assessment, understand diagnosis, teach you how to do a proper assessment, teach you how to do proper planning for children and adolescents, and ultimately getting the best results.
Now, if people want to sign up for the workshop, how do they do it?
www.livelifewelltt.org. They can call us at 224-3581, 224-3581. 317-3471. But everything is online. We put up
I
the
can guarantee
rationale.
I went and checked your website right before I came down here.
Beautiful.
So
you
it's
was
working
helping
well.
me.
Yep.
Yes. So everything is there. We made it very easy for people. There are payment plans available because it's $3,000 per person. If you're registering in a group of 3 or more, it's $2,700 per person. If you're a student, $2,600. If you're registering for all 3 workshops, 15% off. All 2 workshops, 15% off. We're making it affordable for people because running workshops ain't cheap, Vernon. So, but we are making it in such a way that everyone can afford. I am asking government agencies, schools, send your teachers, send your guidance counselors. They are the ones to make the difference. Right? A lot of people calling me and saying, we want to come, but we don't have the money. But if you're part of an organization, send them, make the commitment. Because these trainings we have here are going to revolutionize the way we deal with children and adolescent trauma.
And that's always a good thing. Hanif Benjamin,
Yes.
trauma specialist, always a great pleasure having you on the program. I thank you so much for taking the time to come in.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure indeed.
Always a pleasure. Thank you. You've been watching One on One. Join us again tomorrow for another edition.